Welcome to the 5-Minute Disasters podcast from 5minutedisasters.com, where each week we uncover worldwide disasters in about 5 minutes. If you enjoy the show and would like to support us, why not consider buying us a coffee? Head on over to 5minutedisasters.com/coffee to see how. This is episode 12, The Irish Potato Famine. The Irish Potato Famine, also known as the Great Hunger, was a period of mass starvation, disease, and emigration in Ireland between 1845 and 1852. The famine was caused primarily by a devastating failure of the potato crop, which was a staple food for the majority of the Irish population. It is estimated that 1 million people died as a result of hunger and disease during this period, and another 1 million were forced to emigrate, most fleeing to the United States, Canada, and Britain. The famine had a profound and lasting impact on Ireland, drastically reducing its population, reshaping its social structure, and influencing its political trajectory for generations. At the time of the famine, the Irish population was heavily reliant on the potato as their main source of food. Ireland was under British rule, and much of the land was owned by absentee landlords, with tenant farmers working small plots of land to grow crops, primarily potatoes. Potatoes were ideal because they were nutritious, easy to grow in Ireland's climate, and produced high yields in relatively small spaces. By the early 19th century, most Irish families depended on the potato for survival, with the average adult consuming between 10 to 14 pounds of potatoes per day. Potatoes provided the necessary calories and nutrients for the majority of the population, particularly among the rural poor. However, this dependence on a single crop proved catastrophic when, in 1845, a strain of water mould known as Phytophthora infestans arrived in Ireland, causing potato blight. The disease rapidly spread through the potato fields, destroying crops by causing the potatoes to rot in the ground. That year, nearly half of the potato crop was lost. The following year, the blight returned with even greater intensity, wiping out almost the entire potato harvest. Without their primary food source, the Irish population was plunged into famine. The British government's response to the crisis was slow, inadequate, and often indifferent. Prime Minister Sir Robert Peel initially attempted to address the famine by repealing the Corn Laws, which had placed tariffs on imported grain, and by importing maize, otherwise then known as Indian corn from the United States. While this provided some relief, maize was unfamiliar to the Irish and difficult to cook, leading to widespread malnutrition. Moreover, the government was reluctant to intervene directly in the economy, adhering to laissez-faire economic policies that discouraged large-scale government assistance. This ideological stance, coupled with a lack of understanding of the severity of the situation, contributed to the worsening of the famine. By 1847, the British government, under the new leadership of Lord John Russell, shifted its focus to public works schemes as a means of providing employment and income for the starving population. However, these projects were often poorly organised, and the wages paid were insufficient to buy food at inflated prices. The situation was further exacerbated by the fact that Ireland continued to export large quantities of food, such as grain and livestock, to Britain throughout the famine. While the Irish population starved, exports continued, leading to accusations that the British government prioritised economic interests over human lives. The famine led to widespread disease, with typhus, dysentery, and cholera ravaging the weakened population. Conditions in overcrowded workhouses and the lack of proper sanitation worsened the spread of illness. Deaths from disease far outnumbered those from starvation, with entire families and villages succumbing to illness. The horrors of the famine were felt most acutely in rural areas, where families were evicted from their homes due to their inability to pay rent. Many fled to the overcrowded workhouses, while others sought refuge on the streets, relying on charity to survive. The mass emigration that resulted from the famine permanently altered Ireland's demographic and cultural landscape. Desperate to escape starvation and poverty, many Irish families sold whatever possessions they had to afford passage on overcrowded, often unsafe ships bound for North America and Britain. These coffin ships, as they came to be known, were notorious for their squalid conditions, and many passengers died of disease or malnutrition during the journey. Despite the risks, emigration was often seen as the only option for survival, and the exodus continued for years after the famine ended, with millions of Irish people leaving their homeland in the decades that followed. The famine left a deep and enduring scar on Ireland. The population, which had stood at over 8 million before the famine, was reduced to around 6 million by the end of the 1850s, and it continued to decline in the years that followed due to ongoing emigration. The social fabric of Ireland was also torn apart, with many rural communities decimated and traditional ways of life forever altered. The famine intensified anti-British sentiment in Ireland, with many blaming British policies for exacerbating the crisis. This resentment fueled the rise of Irish nationalism in the 19th and 20th centuries, contributing to the eventual push for Irish independence. The legacy of the Great Hunger is still felt in Ireland today, where the famine remains a potent symbol of suffering, resilience, and the struggle for justice. Memorials to the victims of the famine can be found throughout Ireland and in countries like the United States and Canada, where many Irish emigrants sought refuge. The famine also played a significant role in shaping the Irish diaspora, with millions of people of Irish descent tracing their roots back to those who fled the hunger. The Irish Potato Famine was one of the most tragic and defining events in Irish history. It devastated the population, caused untold suffering, and had long-lasting social, political, and economic consequences. The famine's legacy is one of loss and tragedy, but also of survival and resilience, as the Irish people endured through unimaginable hardship, forever shaping the course of their nation's history. I hope you enjoyed that episode of the 5-Minute Disasters podcast from 5minutedisasters.com. If you did, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And while you're there, why not leave us a review? Also, please consider listening to our other 5-minute podcasts, which you can find at 5minuteproductions.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.